There is a stadium in Ranchi right now that looks nothing like a stadium. Thousands of students have turned the Jaipal Singh Munda Stadium into what can only be described as Jharkhand's Jantar Mantar. A man is sustaining himself on water alone, continuing a hunger strike that has already stretched past a week. Protesters are marching with torches, with copies of the Constitution, with flags bearing nothing but the tricolor. No party symbols, no political slogans, no politicians on stage. Just students demanding something that should not require a protest to demand: a fair examination system. This story is barely making national news, and the reason it is barely making national news is itself part of the story. Let us talk about what is actually happening in Jharkhand, why it connects to something much larger, and why the way India's students are choosing to fight in 2026 is fundamentally different from anything we have seen before. But first, one moment, one incident that captures everything. On August 7, 2026, Neha Bora, the president of the All India Students Association, came from Delhi to Ranchi to stand in solidarity with the Jharkhand student movement. She was marching with thousands of others toward the state assembly when a man pushed through the crowd, shouted religious slogans, and threw ink directly onto her face. Neha has identified the man as an RSS member from Hazaribagh. Law enforcement is handling the case. What happened next is what you need to remember about this moment in Indian history. Neha stood in front of the cameras, ink still on her face, and she said this: "The ink you use to try to humiliate me is the same ink with which we will rewrite this country's future." That line is not a slogan, it is a declaration of something real. And to understand what that declaration means, you have to understand why hundreds of thousands of students across Jharkhand have reached a breaking point. In April 2026, the Jharkhand Public Service Commission conducted its combined civil services preliminary examination. 350,000 candidates sat for 103 vacancies. That is roughly 3,400 applicants for every single post. Every one of those 350,000 people had studied for months, probably years. Every one of them had sacrificed something to be there. The results arrived in July, and almost immediately, something seemed deeply wrong. An OMR answer sheet belonging to a candidate named Suman Surov began circulating widely. According to the sheet, he had only attempted 48 out of 100 questions. Even assuming a perfect score on every answer he did attempt, the maximum marks he could have earned was 96. The published cutoff to clear the preliminary examination was 144. By simple arithmetic, a candidate scoring 96 should not have cleared the exam. Yet, according to the results, he did. Similar sheets began surfacing. Students and aspirants began raising serious questions about the integrity of the evaluation process. These were not fringe voices. These were people who had dedicated years of their lives to clearing these very exams, people who understood the marking system better than most, and what they were seeing did not add up. The allegations raised serious enough concerns that students began demanding an independent investigation. Around the same time, a separate Jharkhand Staff Selection Commission examination was cancelled entirely before it could even be held, after the question paper reportedly appeared outside examination halls. A subsequent CID investigation named a government employee and concluded that the paper had been leaked in exchange for money, with the figure alleged in official reports running to 25 crore rupees. Both incidents together, one involving suspected manipulation of results, one involving an alleged pre-examination paper leak, became the twin triggers for what is now Jharkhand's largest student uprising in recent memory. The question nobody in power wants to answer. The JPSC Civil Services preliminary exam was reportedly outsourced to a private company called TSR Data Processing Private Limited, based in Lucknow. Reports have raised questions about whether this same company had previously faced regulatory action for irregularities. If accurate, the question that students and civil society are asking is straightforward. What process was followed before awarding this contract, and were the company's past records properly reviewed? That question has not been adequately answered in the public domain. This pattern of examination bodies outsourcing critical functions to private contractors without sufficient accountability is not unique to Jharkhand. And this is where the story stops being about one state and starts being about an entire system. When 23 students died and nobody was held accountable in 2019, the Telangana Board of Intermediate Education outsourced result processing and online admissions to a company called Globalina. The company's software was deeply flawed. Around 3 lakh students were incorrectly marked as having failed their intermediate examinations. The intermediate results matter enormously in India. They determine admission into degree colleges, engineering programs, and medical courses. For families who have invested everything in their children's education, a failed result is not just an administrative error, it is a catastrophe. 23 students, unable to process what appeared to be the destruction of their academic futures, died by suicide in the weeks that followed. The company was not shut down permanently. No criminal convictions have been publicly reported in connection with those deaths. Globalina simply changed its name to Coent and continued to bid for and reportedly receive government contracts, including work connected to CBSE processes for 2026. A different name, the same fundamental accountability gap. Now, before anyone says this is a problem of weak laws, consider the following. After the NEET paper leak controversy of the previous year, the central government passed legislation specifically targeting exam paper leaks. It strengthened that law after further student protests, and yet the leaks and irregularities kept coming. If stronger laws were the solution, we would not still be having this conversation. The problem is not the text of the laws. The problem is in who is entrusted with implementing them. What the NEET charges sheet actually revealed. The CBI charges sheet filed in connection with the NEET examination scandal contains details that go far beyond what most people realize. The individuals accused of leaking the question paper were not outsiders or criminals who broke into a facility. According to the charges sheet, they included subject matter experts, the very people selected by the examination authority to design the question paper itself. These were senior academics, professors, researchers, people who understood better than anyone else how hard students prepare for NEET, how much it means to a family from a modest background to get a child into a government medical college. And yet, if the allegations in the charges sheet are accurate, these individuals compromised the paper for money. What this tells us is something deeply uncomfortable. When the people at the top of a system have already decided that the system is a transaction, no law written below them changes that. You cannot regulate integrity into someone who has chosen to abandon it. You can only build structures that make betrayal harder, and we have consistently failed to build those structures. The political hypocrisy no one is naming clearly. Here is the part that students in 2026 see very clearly and are not willing to stay quiet about. During the Jantar Mantar student movement over NEET, the BJP's national leadership used language to describe those protesters that was extraordinary in its contempt. The word cockroach was used publicly by a senior party figure to describe the students. That is on record. The same BJP has extended support to the Jharkhand student movement. Why? Because Jharkhand is governed by a coalition that includes the Congress and JMM. Supporting student protests there has obvious political value. The Congress is not clean here either. The party that fought vocally in Parliament over NEET, that positioned itself nationally as the defender of students, governs Jharkhand. And the Jharkhand student movement happening on its watch initially received a far quieter response. Rahul Gandhi eventually spoke to the protesting students by phone, asked for their list of demands, and said that every government must listen to students. That statement arrived late and carried the texture of damage control more than genuine conviction. Students across the country are reading this clearly. When a protest is useful to your electoral interests, it gets your megaphone. When it lands on your doorstep, it gets your diplomacy. The students are not fooled. This is precisely why the most important decision the Jharkhand students have made is to keep every political party at arm's length. No flags, no stage presence for politicians, no endorsement deals with opposition parties. Mohammed Junaid, who fed students throughout the Jantar Mantar protests, has brought his team to Ranchi to do the same. Sonam Wangchuk called hunger striker Devendra Nath Mahato on video and urged him to at least drink water. Support has come from individuals and citizens groups, but the movement itself belongs to the students, and they intend to keep it that way. Why this movement is different? The Jharkhand student uprising will not get the same national social media reach as the Jantar Mantar NEET protests. That is simply because NEET affects candidates in every state simultaneously. Jharkhand's examination crisis affects a specific state, and the national conversation moves along with the size of the affected group. But that does not make what is happening in Ranchi less significant. In some ways, it is more significant, because the students there are building something deliberate. They are building a protest movement that refuses to be owned, refuses to be co-opted, and refuses to let itself be framed as a tool of anyone's political agenda. They watched what happened to the Jantar Mantar movement. They watched how quickly political parties tried to attach themselves to it and how quickly those same parties tried to discredit it when it became inconvenient. And they are choosing a different path. Their three core demands are not radical. cancel the disputed JPSC preliminary results and contested recruitments, conduct an independent investigation through the CBI and ED, reform the JPSC and JSSC examination frameworks structurally. These are demands that any honest government should be able to respond to with genuine engagement, not press releases. The systemic failure behind India's examination scandals is not primarily a failure of law enforcement. It is a failure of institutional design and a failure of political culture. When blacklisted companies can be awarded fresh contracts, the problem is not that the blacklist was too short. The problem is that the process of awarding contracts can be influenced by considerations that have nothing to do with merit. When the experts setting a national examination paper can allegedly sell it, the problem is not that the punishment was not severe enough. The problem is that the selection process for those experts lacked sufficient independence and verification. When a company's software kills 23 children through negligence and that company simply rebrands and continues winning government work, the problem is not regulatory ambiguity. The problem is that accountability, real accountability, with consequences that cannot be escaped through a name change, does not yet exist in this system. Real accountability requires independence. Independence requires that the people holding power cannot also be the people awarding contracts, supervising investigators, and deciding which cases get prosecuted. And creating that independence requires political will of a kind that no current major party has shown the appetite for. That is what makes student movements the most important political force in this country right now. Not because students have policy solutions that politicians do not, but because students are the only constituency whose primary demand is a system that actually works. They are not asking for a share of the corruption. They are asking for it to stop. Neha Bora stood with ink on her face and said she would rewrite this country's future with it. In Ranchi, thousands of students are doing the writing. Whether anyone in power is paying attention is the question that the next few weeks will answer.